Hi, everybody. This is Nick Berbulis. I'm the editor of Educational Theory. This is another in a series of interviews that we're doing with authors who have published articles recently in the journal. Today, our guest is Soyoung Lee, who published a paper in the journal entitled Covering the Wound, Education and the Work of Mourning. Soyoung, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Good. So let's just start into the paper. So your paper argues that we should find positive educational value in emotions that some people might consider to be negative experiences or negative emotions, specifically in the context of this paper, the experience or the emotion of mourning, such as mourning over the death of a family member. Can you say more about the educational potential of these difficult or negative experiences or emotions?
Sure. Emotions themselves haven't been taken very seriously, let alone negative emotions. So they've been regarded as something, and most something secondary, or to be looked at only when it serves the development of reason or rationality. And negative emotions or negative experiences in educational context, they are usually regarded as something that needs an intervention to be corrected or to be rendered positive somehow. And I think then we miss something important, something fundamental in the human condition, because we actually all live with some negativity. We are bound to live with some negativity. So as you say, I talk about mourning in this paper, and that's an example of this negativity we all live with. So we all experience mourning at some point of our lives if we are in any kind of human relationships with family or friends. And also wounds, physical wounds and emotional wounds, that's also inevitable. And we get hurt by people and we also hurt people. And if this is important part of our lives, I think education also should acknowledge this. And for example, in education, the struggle of a child, it's not something simply to be intervened quickly or simply to be, corrected or overcome as soon as possible. Actually, it's part of their growth, their trying to find their own words and language and developing something of their own. Then they should be given enough time and space for that. But if you look at current climate of education, it's really obsessed with planning and controlling and managing. It's very difficult to them. So planning is like getting more and more tight, and it's really getting more detailed and specific. If you fail at one, it's really difficult to recover and start again, when actually it's quite important to take a chance and sometimes fail. So when everything is tightly planned, I think there's no space for the uncontrollable, and it's really difficult to have a chance for my own voice to grow, and it's also difficult to take something unexpected, welcome something radically other, something I didn't know before. So I think we can look at the negative experiences. By looking at that, we can think of education differently.
Yeah, thank you. That's a wonderful overview of the paper. So the central metaphor in your paper is the idea of a wound. And when we think of wounds, we think about the desire to heal or cover or close a wound. But the way you just put it is that one way of thinking about that desire to sort of heal the wound is that it's also viewed in the context of trying to manage pain or loss, to control it, as you say, to make it go away because it's difficult or unpleasant. You're arguing instead that at least sometimes we need to keep the wound open as an opportunity for learning. And you provide some educational examples of how that process of keeping a wound open is actually a necessary moment. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, that's right. So thank you very much for that. So I provide 3 examples in the paper, and I think they work as a good examples to show how negative experiences are treated in schools and how they actually work as something simply to cover the wound, not really engaging with it. So if I talk about those examples, the first one I introduce is a book called Excellent Ship. It's by William Starosevitz, and it's about successful students in elite universities in the US. And many of them really struggle with emotional difficulties such as anxiety or fear of failure and things like that, but they only try to hide them because they think it's a sign of weakness. So there's this pressure for the achievement and also denial and resistance to this vulnerability. So the second one I take in this paper is that from the UK context, it's about who survives British boarding schools, and many of who graduated boarding schools, they have these emotional difficulties even long after they have left the school. And there is this person whose name is Nick Doffel, and he is a former boarding school teacher, and he's also a psychotherapist. And he terms this as boarding school syndrome. And he relates this to the Rational Man Project that is called, and relates this to the Victorian boarding school. They aimed at producing rational leaders and rational men. And there's again this suppression of emotions or anything negative. And the third one I talk about is this something called social and emotional aspects of learning. So that's called SEAL. So this is reflected on recent policy in Britain, in the UK. And this is something that attempts to take emotional aspects of life more importantly, take them into the realm of education. But then I think there's still a danger, and it can be problematic because it's just trying to take the negativity or emotions into the realm of management again and trying to control it, then it could be again problematic. It speaks of skills and effective learning and positive behaviors. And so these are the examples I talk about. So in the paper.
Yeah, you see some of those same trends in the United States as well. Social emotional learning is a big theme right now in this country also.
I
So
see.
in terms of this idea of keeping the wound open, of dealing directly and openly with mourning, as opposed to trying to make it go away or, as you say, to manage it. But what are some of the dangers of opening up these questions in the classroom? And what can teachers do about these dangers or avoiding these dangers? Because these emotions can be very difficult, obviously. They can be very difficult to deal with or to cope with. By opening them up and keeping them open, what are the dangers there and how do teachers deal with those dangers?
I see. That's actually very difficult because so one danger of trying to managing this is that because those hasty attempts to manage these matters can be turned into a turned into a tool to control negative experiences, and that will suppress abnormal behaviors of child, and they can just end up trying to bring them into the line with what is regarded as normal. Then child's own experience cannot be respected in that way, I think. But now you're saying that maybe there is also danger that when we open up about all these things, and it could be really, again, difficult because then there will be also responsibility for the teacher to engage with them in conversation. And that's actually not easy for the teachers to be open into the conversation, because teachers also feel vulnerable sometimes. Maybe they need to be open up their own experiences and things like that. But I still think it's important to have some places talk about these things, and it's good to, maybe we can begin by creating some occasions where students can make their own judgment and exercise their judgment and justify their judgments, where there's no preset criteria or preset rules. And without those rules, maybe they can say their own words. So maybe it's good to have some good contents where we can talk about with other people.
Yes, well, certainly in one context or another, people do need to be able to explore these feelings, even the ones we call negative feelings. Negative or not, they're feelings that people really have. And somehow, in some contexts, we need to find places to deal with them. I agree with you about that. You give an example in your paper, maybe we can wrap up with this briefly, that I thought was really interesting. You used the example of Jacques Derrida continuing a dialogue with Hans Gadamer even after Gadamer died. And that was something that obviously affected Derrida very, very deeply. It's a different kind of example than the examples you use in the paper, but I thought it was an interesting one of how Derrida was dealing with his own sense of mourning or loss of someone that he felt that he had an unfinished conversation with. And so he wanted to continue that conversation even after Gadamer died. Can you say some more about that example? I found it a really fascinating case.
Yes, I agree with you. I think the dialogue between Derrida and Gadamer is really fascinating. And it's also Derrida's own way of mourning that we can see. And it's to continue the dialogue with Gadamer after Gadamer's death. So Derrida acknowledges that Gadamer's words are in himself, constituting himself. So Derrida is showing that how others and their words constitute us even after their death. So, and he suggests that for mourning to be successful, it must fail. So if you are mourning faithfully for the loved one, there's something wrong about saying that you have completed your mourning. So there is this sense of not closing, not finalizing. Wow. And the other thing Derrida tries to show at the same time is that it's important not to finalize the meaning of a text in the name of understanding or agreement, which is something Gadamer is actually in favor of. Derrida is saying that for a text to be alive, it must always open to further readings and further interpretations. So when Derrida says that successful mourning must fail, and also when he says that final understanding or agreement should fail, he's speaking of the importance of this keeping otherness alive. So this can be also related to what we've talked about, education, to where we can make judgment and reread and re-engage again. It's important to have such contents in education and such place where we can like infinitely engage with.
Yeah, thank you for that. Soyoung, this is a wonderful conversation, a really fascinating paper, and thank you for publishing it in the journal. I do urge people, there's a lot in the paper that we haven't had a chance to talk about. I do urge people to read the original article, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's been great.
Take care.
Thank you.